Okay, everybody, so we're recording, just so you know. Hopefully that's all right with everyone. Okay. So welcome to our first virtual public meeting for Emerald View Park implementation phase 1. How did we get here? You can see the graphic on the right is from the Emerald View Park master plan that was completed last year by city planning, and Merritt Chase were the consultants on that. And it outlined a lot of improvements for the entire Emerald View Park, including the various parks within Emerald View Park, as well as the trails, Grandview Avenue, and it included a phasing plan of priorities. And so now that we have a master plan to work from, we are moving into implementation. I'm Tara Smith. I'm a project manager in the Department of Public Works. And this first phase of implementation is going to be focused on trailheads, a few trailheads throughout the park, and trails primarily in the Grandview and Greenleaf area. And we have capital funding that we've received to do the design, and then also we have it for construction as well. We have our consultants PGH plus MTR on board to guide us through this design phase. And I'm really happy to have them on board. They're experts at trail design. I've done a lot of work throughout the state of Pennsylvania. And okay, so we are going to pause after each section of this for about 5 minutes. But then we're going to also cover questions at the end too, if there are any questions or comments. So feel free to type anything that you think of in the chat box, and we can come back to it later. Also, Pat, hello, Pat, just wrote in the chat, where did the capital funding come from? That is from the city's capital budget for 2022. And so we have some of that earmarked for design and the rest earmarked for construction. All right, and with that, I am going to turn it over to Sarah with PGH.
Thanks, Kara. So today or tonight, we'd like to get through, kind of introduce you to scope, or the phase 1 scope, excuse me, and then talk about some of the recommendations and things we are early sketches for those recommendations for phase 1 to get your input on, and then we'll talk about next steps. So where we are in the design phase process. So as Kara said, you know, the master planning process creates the overall vision, starts to identify various phasing plans through and gathering community input for all of that. This phase 1 design aspect is about taking the phase 1 and you know, making it a reality, right? So we're going to develop more detailed designs for phase 1 and construction documents that will lead to construction. So the schedule we're looking at is that you can see right here, I've highlighted phase 1, or the first community meeting, which is tonight. So we're early on in the process. We will have a secondary community meeting. I think we're still having some various people who's typing a lot in the chat here. So we'll have the second community meeting later in August or early September. So what is phase 1, the phase 1 scope? This is kind of an aerial view of Emerald View Park. Grandview Park is on the upper left-hand corner here. And everything kind of that you see in red that we've highlighted are either trails or trailheads that we are, or street crossings that we are going to focus on in phase one. So a lot of the trails in Grandview Park, the Sycamore Street Trailhead, the Olympia Park Trailhead, the Republic Street Trailhead, Greenleaf Street Trailhead, and there's a Greenleaf Street crossing, as well as some of the trails surrounding the Greenleaf area on this end. I wanted to talk briefly about signage. I know that came up in the master plan, just needing additional signage. This is like the regional parks standards for signage for, all the big regional parks. So Emerald View, Riverview, Frick, Shenley, and Highland Park. And so we'll be using these signage standards when we are going to be introducing additional signs. And so one of the things that we don't really see a lot of in Emerald View Park that we'll probably start to use around some of the trailheads are some of these boundary identification signs. So you see on the right-hand side, I've highlighted in green, this kind of banner sign on utility poles. There's a lot of locations where we've got utility poles along our major trailheads. And so we'll be introducing some of those at those locations. And then there's these amenity signs that we will use to identify the parking lots for some of the trailheads. And then we'll be doing probably at least one interpretive sign. And we'll talk about that at the next meeting as we get into more detail. And then there's some typical regulatory signs. Some of these have already been used at some of the locations. And then I'm sure if you're familiar with Emerald View Park, you've seen the trailhead identification signs and the trail markers. We are going to be adding more trail markers, and specifically, we're going to we call them trail directional signs, which are the signs when you come to an intersection on the trails, showing you which direction to go for different trails. And then we'll probably be adding additional mile markers. Right now, they're every 2/10 of a mile. We'll probably go 1/10 of a mile. So you'll know exactly along the route at what mile marker you're on. That's both for, somebody who wants to, keep track of their mileage, but also for safety. If an accident happens on one of the trails, you're a little bit closer to a mile marker, you can identify where an accident or something happened. So emergency services can get to you easier. Does anybody have any quick questions? We'll stop there just if anybody has any thoughts on signage.
I have a question.
Yes.
Yes, are the trails blazed?
Blazed.
Color-coded blazed, so
yeah,
red trail, blue.
Right, they are not blazed at the moment, and we haven't talked about blazing. The trails are, but if that's something that, that's something that's fairly easy to do, that we can kind of, incorporate if that's something that, if people feel like they're getting lost out there, if the trails are not as wide and well maintained, we can add that.
Sarah, I do think we need to talk with other city staff about trail blazing. I don't think that we do it, but it might be possible, but I think that's just something we'll have to talk internally about.
Thanks, Kara.
I have one question. This is Bob Sherko. I'm president of the Woods of Bradley Street HOA, a new development off of Greenleaf Street here. I was wondering if there was plans. Currently, there's a trailhead post, but it's not marked for like a Bradley Street connector to connect to our plan. And the path from the Emerald View Trail, which is just below our development here, is more like a deer path than in a path. It needs a little bit of work to maybe improve that. But are there any plans for the Bradley Street connector?
I
Brad-
Oh,
Go ahead.
Sarah. I think that we looked into that a little bit. I got an email from somebody at PPC about that, and I don't think that it was called out in the master plan as one of the main connections that we wanted to work on improving. So probably not at this time, but that doesn't mean that it couldn't be a part of the plans. It's just was not part of our plans currently.
I see somebody asked about, there was a plan to bury utility poles. I'm not sure, we'll have to look into that, and see where they're thinking about burying utility poles, but I'm assuming that's not gonna be everywhere. It's very, very, very expensive to do. But we'll obviously make sure, that if, utility poles are scheduled to be buried at some point, that we could still use banners on light poles, or the more expensive thing would be to actually put in more permanent poles, or poles specifically for the signs, the banner signs.
Thank you, Sarah. And I think that Pat might be speaking about burying utility poles on Grandview Ave, which, is not part of our current project right now, but that's a good point that, we'll need, if utility poles do get buried there, we'll need alternate signage options.
Right.
Yeah, and I had my hand up, if I may
Mhm.
speak, and that was part of the original discussions. And I don't know what phase you're going to incorporate that in, burying the telephone poles and the utility lines, but presently there's proposed 27 townhouses along that area in Grandview Avenue. And now would be the time to address that issue. And that's why I asked the question of where this money's coming from, because when I addressed that in our initial discussions during the course of developing this plan last year, you said that the money had to come from Teresa Cale Smith. So obviously the money came from Teresa Cale Smith for this trailhead development, but not for the telephones, poles, and burying them.
It came from the city capital budget. I'm not sure if it was from any specific council person. I don't think so. I do want to push the Grandview Ave component as a priority project. We need to get Domi to lead that one. That's a big, complicated project, but hopefully upcoming, but not what we're focusing on right now. Thank you.
All right.
So
We got-
at what point during this, you said this is phase one. So at what point would that come?
That would be a future phase, not phase one. And the master plan didn't call it out like phase one, phase two, phase three, but it listed high priorities, medium priorities, etc. And so that will get, that's a capital budget discussion, city capital budget discussion every year, which I believe there should be some meetings about in June.
Yeah, and I thought, I'm sorry to keep taking up much of your time, but I thought you said, when I asked you that as because it's in Duquesne Heights in Teresa's district, that she has to request the funding for that.
I'm sorry, I don't know specifically how that works.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we got to keep moving on to get through. We've got a lot of information to go through, and then obviously we want your input on all of this. So I'm gonna, this first phase is a combination of trail improvements and trailheads. And so I'm gonna first talk about what we've kind of done so far and what kinds of trail, like what do trail improvements mean, right? What are we talking about when we talk about trail improvements? So I'm going to show some initial data that we've compiled Max Geis and I from Pashock MTR have walked the trail segments that are included in phase one. And so I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. So this is kind of the western side. Here's Greenleaf. If you're looking on the left-hand side of the screen here, here's Greenleaf Street. And so the red trails here, the trails outlined in red are the ones that we've walked. And if you can see all the little red dots are locations where we are proposing either some existing conditions that we're just identifying or proposed minor improvements. And so I'm not going to go through all of them because there's, you know, a lot of dots, especially when we get over to the Grandview Park area. But I'm going to just kind of briefly go through some examples of the types of improvements that we're thinking of. And so this first one, and we kind of highlighted in green a couple of examples. And so the first one we're calling stone armoring. So this is the photo on the right-hand side is the existing condition. And so you can see it's just very soppy and wet. And there's been some stone armoring here, but obviously we want to make it so that it's much nicer for people to be able to walk and ride through this location. And so, proposing something, very similar to what you saw, but making sure that the stones are above any kind of water level or muddiness to keep people's feet dry. And then the second location here is a spot where some equipment have used the trails to get into certain areas, and we need to do a little bit of trail restoration work here because when we're designing more sustainable trails meaning lower maintenance, less impact on the earth as far as reducing erosion and things like that, we really want to make sure that the trails are outsloped and that there's no berms along the edge here. What this is doing here is the water coming off the hillside is coming and will eventually create ruts and erosion along this because it's going to collect along this side of the hill and create big gullies in the trail. And so to reduce that, we want to remove that berm. This is kind of an example of, we've found this picture of somebody making sure that the trail is outsloped. And so that the side slope is such that when water comes off this hill here, it goes off the trail and doesn't collect onto the trail. The other thing we'll be doing in this location is what we call installing a trail, a grade dip. And so you can see some of the work here. When you're coming down a steeper slope, this is called a grade dip where the water can easily get off the trail. And then you can see that it goes back up a little bit and before it keeps going down. And so this is just a technique to allow water to get off the trail as fast as possible and not concentrate on the trail. Other things that I think a lot of people are more familiar with is a water bar. We try to not have to do a lot of water bars. They're a little bit more aggressive, and you can see here that in this location they've installed some stone going across and basically almost like a ditch. So when the water is coming down the trail, it's hard to see where the grade is going here, but it will hit these stones in this ditch and get off the trail as opposed to following the trail downhill there. And then over near Grandview, obviously there's locations where there's some old box steps that need to be repaired. We'll be adding additional steps in locations like this. You can see, there's been some natural kind of rerouting. People stopped using these steps and kind of just went around them. You know, obviously everybody kind of knows what those look like, but that's just an example. There's some old stone steps, really nice, beautiful stone steps that are in good condition up here, but as you go down, obviously they start to disappear. So, you know, cleaning these up, repairing, adding additional stone steps in this location. Obviously, this is just another example of some stone steps. It won't be that many steps, but there's other locations that where there's some water kind of coming across the trail, and so we want to do some sort of crossing like this where we can armor a little bit. Armoring meaning, you know, installing some stone to keep your feet off, you know, off the out of the wet areas. So those are just some examples of some of the issues we've seen and some of the proposed solutions. I'm going to open it up for just a few minutes before we move on. If anybody has any questions about this, obviously I didn't show you every single, you know, location here and what we're doing. I think it would take way too much time. But we are also, you know, making sure we're locating new signage along the trails. We're looking at, you know, some slope stability issues in some locations. Any quick comments or thoughts on this or questions about sustainable trails? I think Gordon asked what kind of maintenance is required for an armored trail. Really, it's more or less just making sure that you know, over time the stones, if they move at all, hopefully it's not really a whole lot of maintenance, that they last a long time if it's done right, if it's you know, installed correctly. Any other quick comments before we move on? Okay. One of the things we looked at, we are looking at
Some folks have their hands up, and I don't know if that's anybody want. If you want to talk, go ahead.
Hi, this is Mary Beth. I just wanted to ask you on the, I get the concept of the armored stoning. The only question I would have would be in conditions where it's in under canopies, it would get wet, and in time there would be moss that would build up and it could become as slippery as ice. That's the only concern I have about that particular type of construction. So I'm assuming that when you have this type of idea, that you've consulted other trail organizations in a similar environment as to, did this happen, how frequently, and or does it not?
We don't find it very frequent that you know, stones like this get in this type of situation gets covered in moss, especially you know, with trails that are used pretty often. I haven't seen that a whole lot in our work. The biggest issue we have when it is more related to putting in boardwalks when you've got you know, pressure treated wood that's under shade, and a lot of times even if it's not in shade, if it gets wet, it gets really slippery. I haven't seen that so much with what we've seen and with armoring trails like this, using stone like this. And you can see in this existing location, there's been some armoring and there wasn't any, you know, it's under shade, or at least a good portion of it was in shade. And we didn't see any moss growing on this. So I don't expect that would be an issue in this location. But that's a very good question. Any other quick thoughts or comments or concerns before we move on? Okay, if you've got, you know, additional things that you're thinking of, and we move on, we can always talk at the end of the meeting. But there is still a lot to get through. So the Grandview area, this is a map of Grandview Park, or part of Grandview Park. You've got the band shell building is this circle right here, and the main paved path that goes through that park is along this this edge where my cursor is here. And so the existing trails and the way they're named is a little bit confusing, was very confusing when we were out there, in that it kind of, you know, Emerald View Trail split off into several different directions multiple times. In addition, we saw some issues with, I'll zoom in a little bit, this trail, this kind of trail segment here. There was some tree planting here, but we're really concerned. You can see how very steep the hill is here. These are some contour lines. This corner of this trail seems very unstable. And so we were a little concerned about this segment here. And of course, this trail just kind of almost dead ends into what is private property. And so we wanted to get everybody's thoughts on some, the other issue here is too, is Roanoke Connector Trail kind of dead ends into, you know, the kind of the lawn area. And then this piece of this, the end of that trail is kind of no named, but it's just kind of a, you know, obviously in very bad shape. It was paved at one point, but is very eroded and not really paved anymore. And so we wanted to get people's thoughts on kind of organizing the trails in a little, the naming of the trails in a little bit easier to understand way. And so the thought is that what if Emerald View Trail just, you know, is one single trail that kind of comes and ends at Roanoke Street here. And if Grandview actually extends and creates one nice long length that would connect Emerald View to the Roanoke Connector Trail. And then instead of this trail down here being named, you know, Emerald View, that this is just, you know, we're just calling it William Street Connection for right now. We can name it whatever in the future. But there is an opportunity to create a future trail that could extend to William Street. And we understand from Domi that part of William Street may be closed because of landslide issues, that we might be able to connect into that, and they would basically close it for vehicular trail or vehicular traffic, but a portion of it would still be open for pedestrian traffic. And so connecting into that, and then, you know, there could be connections going to the west that way, all on off of William Street. So we would, you know, propose, you can see these little squiggly lines here, kind of closing this segment of trail, because it is just, you know, obviously we don't want to kind of infer that we're going into private property. We would, to make this feel a little bit more, I don't know, simplified, we would propose kind of closing this little segment here. That's where we're a little concerned with the soils and the edge of the slope here. This little piece of path here, I'm not sure how important it is. You know, if people use this or not. It seems like kind of like an extra thing, an extra trail. You could see the next trail down. You could see Grandview Trail just below that. So it's very close to that one. But I do want to get people's quick just a couple comments from a couple people, and then we have to move on, but I'd like to get, please put your thoughts in the chat so we have a recording of what your thoughts are on this. And we can, again, talk more at the end of the meeting. So if a couple people want to give their quick thoughts here, that. So.
So Terry said if the end of William Street connector could tie into the saddle trail across William Street, that'd be nice. Yeah, we're not looking at the saddle trail right now because of property ownership issues, but good idea. Let's see, a couple people are saying thoughts, which is great. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna read them all.
Okay. All right, let's keep moving because we've got to go through all of the trailhead locations. So we'll transition now into the trailheads and some of the crossings, and we're going to start basically from the west end of our scope and of the park and moving towards Grandview. And so this is
Oh.
Greenleaf.
Hey, Sarah.
Yes.
So sorry. Robin just put something in the chat that I just read about the recent landslide that I did just want to mention.
Oh, sure.
Because obviously that's a big disruptor to the trail system. That happened since we started this project, since we hired Patrick, and is not in the budget for this construction cycle, but we are going to request money to fix that landslide and repair the trail there for next year. And a potential other landslide area east of that we're assessing. So I don't want to, I'm not going to go over everything, but that landslide seems like a big one to point out before we move on.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
So thank you.
Okay. So the Greenleaf Street crossing, so that's the corner of Greenleaf and Horner. And so right now, there's really not a whole lot of identification signs. We've got an old sign here that has no a sign post, but no sign on it. And then there's like a crosswalk to nowhere. I know when we were out there, some people were trying to figure out where the trail went, and you can almost see in this photo a couple of signs going up the hill on this guide rail here. But we want to make this intersection a little bit safer and create signage that's a little more better for directional. So this is just a plan view, kind of looking at some of the existing conditions. Here's the existing trail. This is actually an old area. You can see the crosswalk used to kind of end into this, the corner here. There's some utility poles and some inlets. And so our thought is that, we want to redirect this crosswalk and do some line striping in order to kind of identify a trail, a surface that is kind of share the road kind of thing. But so we've got line striping going up Horner Street. We would install new trail directional signs to kind of lead people up Horner. Our other thought here was that we would do some line striping to kind of narrow the intersection, not really narrow it, but there's a lot of excess pavement. And so we'd like to do some line striping just to make it feel like it's a smaller intersection, to make sure people aren't like, speeding down this road. I'm going to go through all of these because I don't think we have time to stop in between each one, but I'd love for people to be able to post their thoughts in the chat as we go along, and then we'll kind of go through it as when we get to the end, if that's okay. The Greenleaf Street Trailhead is, basically a parking lot with a hodgepodge of paving, asphalt and gravel. It's got, not really, it's basically one really long curb cut. And there's really no signage that you can see from the road anywhere that would tell people, hey, this is a trailhead, and not just, I don't know, some random parking lot. So we analyze this from an aerial view perspective. There's an existing wood fence that has that typical wood fence that you see in a lot of other places in Emerald View Park. There's an existing picnic table, porta-john, restroom, a couple of existing trash cans, and one sign that's kind of low. It's kind of hard to see because it's kind of lower to the ground. So what we're thinking here is that there's enough space, at least on the eastern side of the lot, in that we can create a little bit of green space between the road and the parking lot. Maybe we can plant some trees. They'd be smaller trees because there's utility lines above them. But it would help kind of create a little bit more greener entrance into the parking lot. We'd want to put an amenity sign at the corner here, the entrance, to kind of identify that this is a trailhead parking area. And along with some banners on the existing utility poles. There's 3 of them nearby. This gate over here on the left-hand side has to stay. It's for utility access. There's major overhead lines just down the street from here. We're thinking about moving the porta-john and putting a fenced enclosure around it, so it's not, so it looks a little bit more aesthetically pleasing, and creating more of so this would be a gravel lot, but have some maybe a concrete plaza. There'd be an accessible parking space. We'd use boulders as bollards to kind of define the space a little bit more. There's enough space for a bench. We'd raise the sign on its own post, so it's a little bit more visible. Have, the trash and recycling receptacles, enough space for that. And so I think we've got 12 parking spaces in total here. They're a little bit more organized. We're proposing wheel stops so that you can identify and understand where the parking spaces are in the lot. And then planting a couple of trees. The other thing we'd like to do in this location is to provide an accessible route to the picnic table and have an accessible picnic table in this location here. We might have a little stone boulder wall here with a couple of steps. So if you're coming up from the trail side, that you might be able to, come that way as well. And so this kind of allows, any people of all abilities to be able to at least get out into nature a little bit. The trails themselves trails kind of have a different set of guidelines for accessibility. And so some of these trails could be used to some degree for somebody who it might be in a wheelchair, but they're too steep to really create a true accessible trail route all the way around, or any trail loops. And so this was a kind of a good way to get everybody out and have a nice picnic lunch here. The next trailhead is the Republic Street trailhead. And so this one, there's no parking existing. You can see there's no parking signs. I know we parked there for a few minutes just to kind of look around. But there's, existing wood fencing. The sign is kind of behind the fence. We've got an older trash, bin here. And you can kind of see a lot of soil and debris and sediment has kind of made its way down and has kind of made this kind of a muddy area here. So those are the things we'd like to fix. From an aerial perspective, we also notice, actually going back to this, that there's the sidewalk ends right here before this utility pole, and there's not really a crosswalk or nothing that welcomes you into this space. And it's very, vehicular dominated right now. And so what we'd like to do, we've got actually two options here. The first one is create an accessible curb ramp here and a formal crosswalk, another curb ramp here, and creates a small plaza at the end. We would add a new piece of fencing over here that would match the existing on this side to kind of help define that plaza space. We'd like to, obviously, right now there's an existing stormwater channel that is directing some water from Finnegal Street onto into a rain garden. We're going to make some minor modifications to that to make sure that more water is going in, and then whatever water, stormwater is hitting the street from this location down can go into an additional rain garden at the bottom here. We might be able to capture a little bit of stormwater off of Republic Street as well, and into this rain garden. But this little plaza here, again, we've got a bench, updated trash and recycling, and a formal sign in the front of this. And this, scenario, we're thinking that this is, a pedestrian entrance into a pedestrian trailhead into the park system. An alternative, an option 2 would be that, again, we would still want to do an accessible curb ramp here with a crosswalk, that we would keep more of the existing paving, but, put in a curb line across here and at least have a 5-foot wide walk kind of coming around, maybe a little bit more space in the corner where we could put a bench and trash recycling and a sign here. Again, we would do, the same types of enhancements to the stormwater channel here and the rain garden, the existing rain garden. Olympia Park trailhead. This is at the end of Halleck Street, and it kind of dead ends into the trail. And so you can see there's a lot of knotweed in this section. And this picture was taken before, obviously, earlier in the spring. There's not many leaves on the trees. And the knotweed hadn't taken over yet, but right now I'm going back out onto the site, you really can't see the sign because the knotweed has overtaken it. We understand that the parking lot that's at the end of Halleck Street might be part of the improvements. It makes sense that it would be part of the improvements, future improvements to Olympia Park. And so we're not really going to do too much to this because we don't want to waste money on redoing things. And so here really it's more or less putting in a directional sign at the bottom of, at the end of the parking lot to kind of say, hey, the trail's this way. There is one kind of halfway up the slope here, but it makes sense to kind of put something at the bottom. And then our thought here is to pour some sort of concrete pad to really create a little bit of a plaza space so that the knotweed is not overtaking the sign. And then we want to create an amenity sign at the corner to direct people down to the parking area and just identify it as a trailhead. Then we've got Sycamore Street. And you can see me bending over and looking at the sign, the existing sign there. So this trailhead, it's a little bit easier to understand from an aerial perspective. Here's Sycamore Street here. There's a little gravel road that comes in, and there's a lot of space in here. The parking is kind of way set back in. It's a little bit of a wasted space because because of the orientation and the way cars are parking there. And so what we'd like to do, we've got, again, 2 options for the Sycamore Trailhead. So option 1 would be, you can see the existing wood fence we would keep along this edge here and really push that parking area back to create a plaza area where we would have a accessible picnic table, gathering space, again, a new picnic or a new trash and recycling bins. We could do some stone bollards set within that plaza area, accessible parking space. And then the stormwater from this area could flow into a rain garden in this corner. The second option allows us to get a few more spaces. And so the option 1, we get 4 spaces. And option 2, we get 7 spaces. And so, a little bit smaller plaza area. Again, we would use some boulders, stone boulders as bollards to kind of keep that same aesthetic. And our rain garden would be pushed off just a little bit further off to the side here. Obviously we don't want to disturb too many trees. There's a tree here. And then, of course, signage here. We are, looking at the signage by the road as well in both of these options. The one thing that Max and I noticed when we were out, when we were assessing the trails was, this entrance to Bigby Field. It wasn't really in our original scope, but we thought, well, can we do something very quickly and easily to kind of clean this up and at least make the entrance to Bigby a little bit nicer. And so, when I look at this, I see a gate that says, don't, it kind of like, don't go through. It's not very welcoming, these types of gates. Plus there's some old trash cans, just a little bit of clutter of the signs. There's a post here that has a dog way station those are extremely hard to maintain from the city's perspective. And then the sign in the background. And so the thought here, we understand that there's future phases that have, recommendations for Bigby, but that really an easy kind of initial step might be just to have a gravel pad with bollards, get rid of that that gate. These bollards would be foldable so that maintenance vehicles can still get through, and then kind of consolidate where the trash recycling, and then have a new sign maybe over here somewhere. And that would just kind of be a little bit more welcoming from a pedestrian standpoint. We would also want to, no matter what we do here, put new trail directional sign at the top of the steps. I know if I, was wandering down here and looking down, there's no information that says that this is a trail and what type of trail it is and what the name is. And so having something here that kind of leads you down would be ideal. Okay, so I went through all of that. And we've got about a half hour left. And so if we can go through some comments, if people want to, I don't know, Kara, did you were about to say something.
Oh yeah, sorry. I just wanted to interject real quick about Big Beat and also Olympia and just emphasize that, we'll have to see if this makes sense to do this now. Obviously, it's a simple improvement. That's a big improvement in terms of making it more welcoming to the field and the trail. But we're not improving these areas that much at Olympia and here, simply because there are other bigger plans for both of these park areas. So just to be clear about that. That's
That's
all I was
fair.
going to say. And then,
Yeah.
how do we want to cover questions? Does anybody have any thoughts they want to speak to, or we can go back through the chat?
Yeah, if anybody, wants to speak up now, then we can go through comments.
And yes, Gordon, we can send you the presentation or put it online. Are you going to do that for some folks that couldn't make it tonight?
Anybody have any thoughts on the different options for the Sycamore Trailhead?
This is Nancy. I like the one with the 7 parking spaces. My only concern is that there's a lot of graffiti. I don't know if you came upon it when you walked the trail. So I like the materials they're using. I'm just afraid that they'll be marked up pretty rapidly. It's a pretty desolate space. And we have a lot of homeless down there. So I don't know how you can stop that from happening. That's my only concern. I don't know what other materials can be used that would dissuade graffiti from happening on it.
Yeah, the best we can really do in terms of graffiti is make sure the signs and things can be easily cleaned. The wood materials that are kind of typical for trails and trailheads, like the wooden post signs and things. I know, there's obviously graffiti on the wood, which is a little bit harder to clean off. It's more like sanding off, maybe. So I'm not sure what we can do about that, but we'll think about that more, because that's a very good point. The signs themselves, I think, are that the city standard signs for these parks are I think supposed to be easily cleaned, so that graffiti can be, I think, removed off. I don't know, Karen. I thought that's
Or maybe pea gravel instead of using concrete.
Oh, you're saying that
even on
would-
the pad, even on the pad. It's pretty.
Okay, yeah, I haven't
Good.
I haven't come across graffiti on the ground like that.
I guess I come across a lot of graffiti. I live on Arlington Avenue below this, so
Okay,
it's
okay,
a never-ending
right.
sort of thing. But that was my only thought of that. I love the extra parking there. And then getting back to the trails, the William Street Trail, I think it's an excellent idea to name it William Street. That will never be reopened again. I don't know why Domi, I don't know if they've given a hard no on it, but they pretty much have given a hard no that will never be reopened to traffic. I think they faced a lot of pushback from residents on Cola, but if Williams was maintained into a walking trail, it's starting to erode past. It's getting even worse up there. If you walked it recently, it's getting even tighter. But I do occasionally see people hiking, and when they get to that dead end, there's like the unmistakable pulling out the phone and trying to figure out what to do. And sometimes they bushwhack it down the hill. But that would be great. And also I can see people like pointing to downtown, like they would like to reach downtown and they cannot figure out how to get there. And I know, no, it's not part of the trail and it should be really obvious, but
Right.
yeah. You think it's even yeah. Yeah. There we go.
Yeah,
Yeah.
unfortunately, our scope is probably not going to cover creating a new trail in this phase. But I think getting it on a plan and then, identifying it as a
sure.
future
Yeah,
connection is
yeah.
important.
Exactly.
Um,
Now where it just dead ends, it's kind of silly. It's just a weird,
Right,
but yeah, if it did
right.
connect somehow, that'd be awesome.
Does anybody else want to have anything else to say before we go through some of the comments?
True. Pea gravel.
I would say that the comment about the pea gravel is unfortunately not accessible. But we can think about, well, I would love to be able to use, some sort of pavers or anything, but I think we need to have further discussions with DPW on that and that's obviously more expensive. But to create, a little bit different defining plaza spaces, using different materials. So I think we'll have further conversations about, whether this is concrete or some other material. Or maybe it's an integral color concrete to make it different, or, something. So we'll have further discussions about that. So, definitely we'll think about the graffiti, thoughts on whether these, are going to be graffitied up or not. Anybody else want to speak now?
Sarah, I forget, do we have another section to cover after this?
No, this is
Okay.
it. This is it. So, if people have any thoughts on any of these options, there was, there's a couple different options for the Republic Street trailhead. I'm curious as to what people think about these. So this is option 1 again, and this is option 2. Option 1 kind of provides more pedestrian space.
Or we can go back through the chat. There were some, good comments and questions in there. But yeah, definitely for these ones that we have options, let us know if there is a preference. If we're ready to go back in the chat, we can do that.
Yeah, let's go to the chat here.
I'm trying to find where to go back to, but I guess when we were talking about the trails in Grandview, Gordon said making the trail system more understandable is a good thing. Yep. Terry said there were blazes when there were trails that were made of colored yarn. It was a volunteer effort. That's awesome. What needs to be done to get the Bradley Street connector improvements in the budget for next year? Robert said. So, I think we can look at that to see if it's just a very small segment to make it to the Greenleaf Trail. Maybe that's something that we can cover in this project. But, again, it's all about the priorities. What are the priority connections? And for the budget, I looked up, I will put in the link here or in the chat, a link to the 2023 budgets page. Unfortunately, the meetings have already happened for this year and the survey is closed. But I think you could email the capital budget team at any time with your thoughts. That happens in June every year, May and June, by the way. Things for, good thing to look out for every year to weigh in on the capital budget and operating budget. How about adding a sign there before people look out before they're crossing? That's at the first one.
Greenleaf, yeah.
Greenleaf Street crossing.
There are existing kind of pedestrian crossing signs. You know, the signs that if you're in a car coming up the hill or coming down, there's signs saying pedestrian crossing ahead. And then there's signs, existing signs here already that's, you know, that identify this as a pedestrian crossing. Sign for people to look out for cars before crossing.
Okay. And then Robin said, quick note about the porta-john at the Greenleaf parking lot. That was actually a temporary unit for several PPC volunteers. Good to know. I think that that is a good place to have one permanently, so we can talk with my other DPW staff about that.
Right.
Mary Beth says blazes are painted in different colors on tree trunks at eye level. It's done without ruining the environment. They can be tagged onto a tree like the Western PA Conservancy does. Maybe reach out to them. Yes, I want to talk more about that. I feel like we don't really do it, and I'm not sure what the reason is. So I just want to kind of get to the bottom of that, but it certainly might be worth considering.
Yeah, and certainly painted blazes are, you know, easy to do and they don't hurt the trees. They also sell plastic tags that you can put on trees, but you have to pound them in. We don't necessarily recommend doing that because every time you puncture, you know, the bark of a tree, you're wounding it and you could lead to infect, you know, various diseases and fungal things getting in there. But that, you know, that's a very easy way to kind of identify the trail route. So yeah, I would think that, Kara, if you know, somebody has made a decision whether, you know, that to not blaze these, but I think it's a very valid point that we can look into.
Okay, cool. Pat says, do you presently have the funding for the parking lot proposals you're presenting? We do have funding for construction. We have 900,000. So we're trying to, you know, with this, we're trying to cover as much as we can. We might need to decide where we need to cut, you know, like as we were talking about, that William Street connector might not be something we can get to in this, but we do have funding. So we're just trying to see what are our priorities within this 900,000 that we have. So, you know, what you're weighing in today will help us to make those calls. That is not Fingal Street, that connects to Republic. Yeah, I think Fingal and Republic are connected there. New street signage was just placed. So, okay, we'll make sure that we, you know, are using that if it's appropriate to keep it there. Do we have the funds? Yep, just covered that. Terry says, I think Bigby Street neighbors take care of replenishing the doggy poo bags. Make sure someone contacts those neighbors before removing that station. Okay, good note, thank you. Megan B, will there be any signs for folks to keep dogs on leashes?
I think the regulatory signs have that there.
Yeah, yeah.
that They are on those signs, or at least they should be on those signs. I don't have a close-up on this presentation, but yeah.
No, that's right. I just had to think about it for a second. PG says, have folks actually walked the entire length of trails in Emerald View Park? It seems some of these priority areas are already the trailheads and sections of trails that are in better shape. There are some sections of trails not discussed that could use some simpler improvements to make them more usable versus elaborate plans with concrete pads, parking, etc. I definitely feel you on that sentiment. Yes, we looked at all the trails in the master plan and we had this budget to work with and we had to make decisions about what to include and what not to include and basically follow the master plan recommendations for trailheads that, you know, get the highest use already or are significant entrances into the park. So that's why we're doing those. Basically, we also had noted that Grandview area needed some work with those trails there. And, as you can see, we're thinking of closing some or fixing others, landslides, et cetera. I think that's why we chose that. But there are definitely areas, you're right, that need improvements, and they could be simple improvements. And I wanted to get to them all, but unfortunately, as much as $900,000 sounds like, we just could not do all of the trails in this phase. There's Mount Washington area trails, and there's, of course, the connection we want to make from Olympia Park to Chatham Village, if they will work with us, and other areas like that that are definitely important. And also, if you have specific thoughts, KG or others, on areas, please go ahead and let us know for future. And the idea with improving these parking lots that are already, they're kind of okay. It is a regional park. We're trying to bring it up to the same level or similar that Shenley and Frick have. And, we're trying to make these prominent trailheads, because the trails are such an important part of Emerald View's identity. We want to make sure that they are in great shape. Concerning trash cans at the trailheads, they're emptied weekly by the city. Rodent problems, consider leave no trace, pack in, pack out. Yeah, I think we can post that, we can suggest it, but people really like trash cans. It's tough. I don't know what to say about that one. E-gravel, yep, so the discussion about the graffiti versus ADA accessibility, and we'll look at what other options we could consider. Lighting would help. Signage on getting downtown. There is a trail to downtown already, so maybe referencing to that. Pea gravel can be much more challenging for just general maintenance, weeds. Yeah, I think that would come up. Do not add lines to Greenleaf to narrow the road. That road is narrow enough and cars already don't stay on their side of the road. Lines to indicate the direction of the trail is fine and needed, but don't impact the traffic flow.
Yeah, I want to clarify that. We're not suggesting narrowing the road, but painted lines in this area. This is not a, this location, nobody should be driving in this area. So we're really not going to be narrowing the road, but just there's the perception of narrowing the road and the actuality. And so I would say, again, we're not narrowing the road. It's just the perception of, the painted lines defining the road better.
And the reason that is because everybody should pretty much be going down Greenleaf Street. That road to the right, Horner Street, it is a public right of way, but it kind of only goes to one house. So it's a bizarre one. So they probably shouldn't be going up there anyway,
Right.
Unless they're that guy.
Yeah, and we're going to be talking with Domi to make sure that they're okay with, with what we're doing here as far as the line striping. We might have a conversation about putting the plastic bollards in, but I'm not sure that's going to go there. I think, at least the line striping seems like a good idea. If we had additional money, it'd be great to remove this pavement and put in a rain garden and stormwater storage. And I'm not sure that's going to happen here at this point, but that's something that I think, we would suggest for future, as a potential future project, maybe in coordination with PWSA or somebody like that.
Going back to the list, Robert said option 1, but unfortunately now I don't know which he's referring to. You remember, Robert, which is that this Republic Street one?
Republic Street.
Yeah, Republic Street.
Okay, great, thank you. Terry says Republic Circular Plaza Trailhead is my fave. Uh-oh, so we have opposing thoughts here. No, that's okay. All right. No one has ever expressed opposition to blazes. We just did it last time when knitting was the craze. Remember, knit the bridge. Okay, yes, we will definitely look into blazing. The circular lot at Republic Street seems like it'd be easier for maintenance. Also, a lot of people currently use that space as a turnaround. Huh.
Okay,
Okay.
that's good to know. Yeah, we might still be able to, I don't know. We could kind of modify both of these to get a little bit bigger plaza, but maybe bulb this out a little bit to get a little bit more space if people need to turn around. But that's good to know. Thank you for saying that, because we were wondering why there was just so much pavement down at the bottom there.
Yep. Okay. And then Pat says, so you received 900,000 already from the capital budget. Yes, that's in the 2022 budget. Including and design too. And they wanted it to be spelled out for design and then construction. You know, if it had been the whole amount for design, we could have done a whole lot of design and then seek construction money later, but that's not how they did it. Sean says, I did a lot of construction on the trails and currently responsible for maintenance of the trails. Awesome, Sean, thank you. What organization are you with, Sean, if you don't mind saying?
I think he's with Land Force.
Oh, okay, cool. Yes, Land Force does a lot. And PPC. That's great to have you here. So please let us know if you have any specific thoughts. Mary Beth, thank you. Pat says no. No bollards on Greenleaf. Yeah, I don't think we're gonna do that anyway.
Yeah.
All right. AG, drive there in the winter when it's covered in ice and you can't stop before you change Greenleaf with bollards and or striping. Okay, so we're probably gonna stick with paint striping on that. So thank you for the feedback.
Okay.
That's all the chat. Does anybody else have any thoughts? You feel free to voice them aloud. If not, all right, great, thank you. I am going to put, in case you haven't seen it yet, we have a website for this project. There's not much on it yet, but you can follow it and it will post. Oh, Sarah, you go ahead and talk about next steps.
Yeah, real quickly, Kara, and everybody, our next steps are to revise these recommendations based on your input. We're going to, we'll have additional meetings with various city departments, especially DOMI, and others from DPW to talk about maintenance and streetscape improvements, those types of things. Obviously, key stakeholders. We are going to start, we haven't really done any topographic surveys yet because we wanted to kind of get an idea of what we'll exactly be doing in each location. So we can, reserve spend our resources wisely. And then we'll start to develop more detailed drawings. And we will circle back with everybody later in the summer. Like I said, probably later in August or September. It depends on how fast we can get the surveys done and meet with various people that we need to talk about specific things. And we will let you all know. The Engage PGH website is down at the bottom here. Stay tuned that we'll have updates there, and certainly, we will be advertising in similar ways that we did this first meeting. So you should all probably receive the same kind of email notifications at that point, sometime in August. So, Kara, do you have any other last thoughts? Anybody else have any last thoughts? Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. I really appreciate you spending time with us this evening and giving us your input on all of this. And it's very crucial information. Obviously, this park, you know, more than, I mean, I've spent some time there, but probably not as much as many of the neighbors who live closer. So we really appreciate your input tonight. So thank you again and have a great evening.
All right, thank you, everybody. Yep, we really appreciate it. And thank you, Sarah and Max.